My heart breaks every time I see that millions of chess players keep making the same 4 mistakes in this chess opening position. I'm Grandmaster Igor Smirnov, and let me show you what those mistakes are and how you can take advantage of them, because if you know how to do that, you can easily defeat lots and lots of your current opponents. Right, so what's the most common chess opening on amateur level? Your opponent opens up with pawn e4, pawn e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then pros usually prefer going into the Rilo pass, which is a more complex strategic opening. And on amateur level, most people play bishop to c4, which leads to the Italian game or the two knights game. Very often the positions are similar anyway. So you do play something like knight f6 and bishop c5 at some point, and then we end up in positions like that. In those positions, your opponents usually play something like pawn d3 or knight c3. Those that are more aggressive may try knight g5 against you, trying to attack you right away. And you'll be surprised to know that many of those common approaches are just wrong. And especially, of course, let's talk about one of the most favorite ideas of white in all of these variations. When they go pawn to d3, you play bishop c5, and let's say both players castle, and now, or in some other position, your opponents, for the most part, will go bishop g5, trying to pin your knight and initiate some sort of an attack that way. You may be surprised to know that this move bishop g5 more often than not is wrong if you just know how to take advantage of it. So let's start from this particular position so that we can see what options you have available here. So first off, when they play bishop g5, I always recommend that you play pawn h6. Although that doesn't neutralize the pin instantaneously, because white can simply play bishop h4 and maintain the pin, but you give yourself one more potential option, so that anytime you need that in the future, you have this move pawn g5 to kick this bishop out. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to play right away, but you always have this option available, which is nice. But first, you do play pawn d6 just to continue your development, and in this position, the most played move by white is pawn to h3, preventing you from playing bishop g4. So far, it's clear that your opponent thinks that this pin is something really great, and so it makes sense for him to prevent you from doing the same. But in this position, actually, once again, you may be shocked that black is nearly has a forcing win here, or at least it's something close to it, again, if you just know how to proceed correctly. So our plan is to take over the king side and to turn the situation around where you are going to start attacking there. And you play pawn g5 first, kicking this bishop away and getting some extra temples for your expansion. At this point, your opponent has the evergreen question to take or not to take. Your opponent can just retreat back to g3, we're gonna take a look at this in a moment, or they may try to sack the knight over here, but expose your king, hoping to continue their attack later. So we're gonna take a look at that just as well. Actually, a little spoiler, you win in both cases, so that's nice. Let's start from a more trivial move, bishop to g3. Now we do play knight h5, and we keep chasing this bishop away, which is nice because you see that this bishop already gave you 3 extra temples, like pawn h6, pawn g5, now knight h5, and you always keep attacking this bishop, forcing white to just defend instead of doing something that they want. And knight h5 is actually an attacking move because thanks to this pin, this pawn cannot move, and so knight takes g3 is a real threat that would simply win a bishop for nothing. Therefore, white usually drops it further back to h2, and we keep attacking. That's our plan. We just play pawn g4. Now we attack the knight, attack this pawn, which forces white to take. Now bishop takes g4. We could develop our bishop with a tempo without spending any extra time on it. And you can see that thanks to this little operation, we really took over the king side. Now we have this open g-file against white's king, and you will easily relocate your rook there after you remove your king away. Also, your bishop over here is very active, putting the pain. Your other bishop is also eyeing towards white's king. Your knight from h5 is also very active, ready to join the party. Your queen is ready to come forward and increase the pressure. Your other knight is ready to jump to d4 and solidify your attack. So overall, you can see that basically you already have a very easy-going attack, which white really have nothing to oppose to. So for example, white goes knight d2 to defend the knight. We play queen f6, putting potentially some more pressure and getting the queen involved. White plays, let's say, pawn to c3 to stop you from moving your knight there. You can play king h8, that's part of our plan to relocate a rook to this open file. White plays whatever, let's say king h1 in this game, they play rook to g8. White played queen to e2. You see that white really has nothing to do. Even if white wants to counterattack, like how can they possibly do that? There is simply nothing they can do, and your attack is easy going. Black played queen g6. lining up his pieces against this g2 pawn. So white play rook g1 to defend it. Now knight comes to f4, attacking the queen, putting more pressure here. So white has to capture it. But now after pawn recaptures, the problem is the h file is vulnerable to your attack. So queen h5 is nearly a checkmate. White played g3 in this game, trying to somehow escape through this g2 square, but that was too late. After queen h5 and queen h3, that was a simple checkmate. So once again, you could easily see how black could turn the situation around and how white's seemingly aggressive move bishop g5, let me get to this moment once again. Going back to this stage, you can easily see how white's seemingly aggressive move backfired so badly, and you could get numerous extra temples and develop a crushing attack. And now let's go over a more aggressive option of white. If they choose to sacrifice the knight here instead of retreating their bishop. If knight takes g5, they're willing to give up a knight, and in exchange they're maintaining this pin, and they're hoping to continue their attack in the future against your exposed king. What do you do in this case? Again, very often if you don't know what you're doing, you get in trouble. Indeed, white develops their attack. But if you do know the right approach, once again you can take over the king side and this aggressive plan backfires for white. So our plan is still the same. We don't want actually to defend on the king side. We want to take over and to attack. And we use these open files for our own attack, although white hopes that is going to help them, but that's not the case. So we do play king to h7, and the plan is still the same basically, to play rook g8, which will in this case, first of all, attack the bishop, forcing it to go, and secondly, we'll just put our rook against white's king and will help our attack. After king to h7, your opponents will probably play queen to f3, because that's the only attacking move they have available. Attacking this knight, it can't go because it's been down to the queen. Looks like black's in trouble, but we have a brave move, king to g6, where the king is defending this knight, but also is literally attacking this bishop, and we aren't actually scared to grab this bishop on the next move if white does nothing about it, because white cannot checkmate you with a single queen involved, and so they have to defend the bishop. Now, there are a couple of options here for white, and both of them lead to really funny variations. One of them is pawn h4, trying to defend the bishop that way. Then you play knight takes to d4, attacking the queen over here. And certainly white does not really want to go back, because that kind of means that white acknowledges a failure of their attack, and you're still a piece up. So white has to be more aggressive. Very often they play queen g3. It's a tempting move, trying to create some attack there, but it blunders the move knight to e2, forking the king and the queen, and you win that way. Besides h4, white has one more aggressive option, queen to g3. In this case, once again, it looks scary at first, but you have another brilliant counter-attacking move, knight to h5. It turns out that you can move your knight, despite it's been pinned to the queen, because you counter-attack their queen. And they have nothing to do but to take it, because if not, you're gonna simply take this bishop with your own queen, and yeah, it's over for white. But if they take here, they take your queen, you take there, and now you're still a piece up. On top of that, you're threatening the rook, you're threatening the bishop, which means that as a result of this operation, you're gonna have a significant material advantage. For example, if they move their bishop away or take here, you take the rook, and now at the end of the day, we have just a rook up. And you play whatever you want, and with an extra rook for nothing, in an endgame, you're going to win easily. By the way, if you want to go more in depth about this bishop g5 pin, I've got a separate video where I cover it in more details, analyzing some other variations and positions where your opponents are trying to use it against that, so you may check it out later if you're interested. Moving on to the next common error. In this position, lots of your opponents will simply castle, which is a very usual move overall, but very often turns out to be a bad mistake in this particular position, because unlike the rival pass, where very often taking on e4 isn't very beneficial for black, in this position it is pretty good. Now in this case, most of your opponents will be tempted to play a rook to e1, trying to attack the knight and indirectly attack the pawn and maybe even the king. It looks very advantageous for white, but you don't defend. Instead you play pawn d5, which serves the defensive purpose. We defend the knight, but we also hit the bishop, so that's nice. And for that reason, it was quite unfavorable for white that they had their bishop here on c4, so you gained an extra tempo. Now, if they move their bishop to b5, trying to pin your knight and create some more threats over here potentially, we once again ignore it and we counterattack with bishop to c5. We're hitting this pawn twice with your bishop and the knight, and white needs to do something about that. They're gonna play pawn d4, taking advantage of this pin that your knight cannot move and therefore he cannot go there and take it, have to take by the pawn, but then they also recapture, and for 1 second it looks like white has great attacking opportunities against you because your knight is pinned, the other one is pinned just as well, white is putting pressure, but you stay cool and you simply castle, and it turns out that white really has nothing. They're just a pawn down, and actually you're attacking, you're hitting this knight twice, they need to defend it somehow. And also there is a fun line, if they take over here on c6, attacking your queen, hoping for some trades, you can once again completely ignore it, so white will feel pretty bad about this, and bishop takes f2 is a nice intermediate move, checks to the king, and after it moves, although you could take this knight and it's fine, there is an even funnier line where you just ignore it once again, you keep ignoring white just altogether, whatever they do, you just ignore it and do your stuff. So we take over here on e1. And at first you may be wondering like, well, wait a second, what if they take out my queen? Well, then you play knight to f2 check, and you get their queen. So it's quite a funny variation. It looks like something was mixed up here, and we have a couple intruders in each other's territory. But you can see that you're already up on exchange, and the pawn, actually 2 pawns, plus this knight isn't going anywhere. Right, you're going to capture it on the next move, and as for your pieces, they still can move, so it still actually takes an effort for white to try to catch them because they can easily go back. So overall, you have a decisive material advantage and you win. Alright, thank you for being patient. We've got 2 more common errors to cover. In this position, some of your opponents will play pawn d3, and after bishop c5, for whatever reason, the second most played move in this position is the move knight to g5. And I cannot really explain that. Maybe they're hoping that you're going to blunder this pawn simply, or maybe they mixed up something and think that it's a fried liver attack, but for whatever reason they do play this move knight g5. And it doesn't make much sense because you can simply castle, you were going to castle anyway, and you simultaneously defend this pawn. Initiating this trade for white is unfavorable for white because normally 2 pieces are stronger than a rook in the middle game. And so once white realizes that, that wasn't successful, they simply castle. Now, in this position, most players, what do? Is they simply play pawn h6, the knight goes back, and we continue a usual chess game. But if you do know how to take advantage of white's error, you aren't gonna let them slip away with this error so easily. Instead, you play pawn d5, striking in the center. You're gonna play more aggressively. If white plays a wrong move, why would we play more defensive chess? We're gonna be aggressive and we want to win. So pawn d5, white captures, and now instead of recapturing, you toss in one more in between move, bishop g4, hitting the queen. What can white do now? They cannot move this pawn because it is pinned down to the king. So pawn f3 is not an option. They could theoretically move their knight back, but it doesn't seem too fun for white. They just move the knight forward to g5, now they're going to drop it back and put it under this pin. So in most cases they are not thrilled about that and they move their queen away, which is another mistake actually, because now instead of taking this pawn, once again we have a stronger alternative, which is knight to d4. Now this pawn was abandoned and you're threatening knight takes c2, which will fork the queen and the rook. And it's again quite uncomfortable for white to defend it. If let's say they do this with something like bishop to b3, you have another fun move, bishop e2. Strangely enough, this rook was trapped right on f1. There is nothing white can do to save it. So you win the exchange, and overall you have just a much better position. Notice that you are fully developed, while white is still kind of stuck there in the first rank, and their pieces are disorganized. So on the next move, you're going to start capturing like literally everything. You can take this rook, you can trade this bishop if you want to, you can play h6, drop this knight away, you can take back this pawn with your queen or knight, and you just have a dominant position and extra material, so that is clearly winning for black. And we're saving the best for last. Here is my favorite error of white. Knight goes to c3. You wouldn't believe that such a natural move very often is a losing mistake. And how you can take advantage of this is if you know this little tactics, knight takes e4. The point of these tactics is that you're sacrificing your knight temporarily because right on the next move you are ready to get it back, very often getting a dominant positional advantage. And after that, very often white takes here, you recapture and life's good. You attack this knight or bishop comes out, pins the knight. You can always play pawn f5, castle queenside, knight d4. Again, you just have so much, and white really have nothing to oppose to your simple attack. So that's how this little inaccuracy of white very often leads to a completely disastrous outcome. Now, let me address one question that you guys commonly ask me about this when I show this variation. Let me go back a couple moves. Here, you ask me in comments like, it's all good, Igor, but what if white plays bishop takes f7? That refutes your plan, because now white will not only avoid from this double attack, but they're also exposing your king. Well, here's the thing. Yes, white did play something creative to get out of your tactics, but in fact they made their situation even worse, because now after d5 you took the center, you attack this knight, it keeps running away around the board while giving you extra tempos. You have two bishops, and the fact that your king is a bit exposed is not really a problem, because they have one check to deliver, knight g5, king goes back, and their deck is over. In fact, it never really begun. They couldn't really do anything against your king, but their knights are actually in trouble. Now you threaten pawn e4, and if one knight goes away, you're gonna pick up the other one. So those knights are shaky. They have to play something like pawn d3, let's say. Then you can play pawn h6, driving this knight away. It has to go to an awkward square knight to h3. It's quite funny that this knight made a long journey through b1 to ultimately land to this passive position where it has nowhere to go to, really. After that, you can go bishop g4. You can see that your king is in complete safety. There is nothing that possibly attacks this king. It's quite the opposite. Actually, white's in trouble, because now with this pin, quite annoying. You're threatening pawn e4 potentially, and you're just waiting here. You can play queen f6, rook e8, pawn e4 at some point. Again, you have a simple attack. White has nothing. Sometimes they play queen e2, trying to stop you from e4, but that also backfires to knight to d4. And you still take advantage of the pin, so the knight cannot move. If it moves, you pick up the queen. So they have to move the queen somehow. And if queen takes, let's say here, you have a pleasant choice of how you prefer to win. You can take here on c2 and then win the rook, thanks to this fork. Or you can take here, which is simpler, and then you win this knight on h3, and you're clearly just a piece up. And white has nothing. On the next move, if you want, you can trade queens and get to a winning endgame, or you can win in the middle game, so you can win however you like. In fact, this knight takes e4 tactics is very common. It works in various different openings, and therefore, if you enjoy this variation, I would recommend that you check out this video where I go more in depth around this. And also, if you want to know my best training methods that you can use to elevate your rating by 100-200 rating points quickly, you're welcome to attend my free masterclass by clicking the link over there. Wishing you all the best. Take care.